In this video, we're going to look at the next steps for writing the MapIllustrator class. What we've done so far is we have created instance variables for grid, rows, columns, max and min, that's for the elevation, max and minimum elevation, the constructor, which reads in the file and fills the grid. We've also filled out the find min, find max, get rows, get columns methods. Now it's time to tackle the draw map. This is what our map should look like when it's completely drawn. We see that the highest elevations, these mountain peaks, are in white, and it goes grayscale all the way down to the lowest areas, which are in black. The goal of this method is to use the graphics object to draw a 1x1 square on our drawing panel that's going to represent the elevation at that particular location. So we need to use loops to traverse the grid. Using its elevation, we're going to determine which color of gray needs to be drawn at that location, and then we're going to draw using that graphics object. So I'm going to start by writing two loops. My outer loop will go through the rows. You can either use the instance variable rows, or you can use the 2D array itself. So grid.length tells me how many rows. Next, I'm going to iterate through the columns. I'm going to pull a row out of the grid and ask for its length. That tells me how many columns I have. So our goal is to use the graphics object to draw the rectangle. All right, so each of our rectangles will have a width of 1 and a height of 1. And the first two values that I pass in as parameters are the x and y values. So you might ask me, why don't I put rows and then columns? Why do I put columns first? Well, if you think about columns, you think of as the column index increases, you move from left to right. We think of x that way. X moves from left and right. And rows move up and down. So that corresponds to the y coordinate. We also have to determine what color this graphics object should draw. That's going to be done with g.setColor, and we have to pass in a color. But first we have to determine what color it should be. Let's look at how to make a color in Java. To make a color, you can simply call the color constructor in your Java program. And there's a couple of different constructors, but I recommend using the constructor that takes in 3 integers, one for red, one for green, and one for blue. Red, green, and blue make up different channels. They're the 3 channels that turn on a pixel. So the range of these colors is from 0, which means no light is showing, all the way up to 255, which means the maximum light is showing. So if I wanted a color in the grayscale, I would set all the channels equal to the same thing. So here I have a color constructed where I passed in 125, 125, and 125. That's the same value for each of the channels, red, green, blue. I would get some sort of medium gray color. Now we need to determine what value we should use for the color channels red, green, blue when we create a color. Now we have a 2-dimensional array called grid, and it represents the elevation at every point on the map. So I've drawn 2 lines here. This number line represents the elevation. So 0 would be sea level, but our map has a minimum elevation and a maximum elevation. So we want this space, this elevation space, to be basically mapped to this color range space from 0 up to 255. So we can use proportions to calculate what the color value should be. So this line here from min to the grid element is to the full range of the elevation as shown here, just as this color value is to the full range of the color range shown here, which is 255. So now that we have our proportions set up, all we have to do is solve for color. So if we multiply both sides by 255, then we'll have our answer for what the color value should be. Now we have to code the formula that we used to determine the color. So each color channel, red, green, blue, will be the same, And the formula is 255 times the grid value, the elevation at a certain location at R and C, minus the minimum elevation, all divided by the full range of the elevation, that's max minus min. Now we're going to use that to set the color of the graphics object. I'm going to construct a new color on the fly, and I'm going to use the constructor that takes in red, green, blue, and I'm going to pass in the same color for each channel. That'll make this color gray. Let's see how this draws. Here's our map. All the pixels are drawn in at one little pixel at a time. The low areas are shown in black, and the high points of the mountains are shown in white.